Okay, thank you. So as has been asked by Dilip, what I would like to do is to address and then discuss some of the what we can call as popular misconceptions of history of Sri Lanka. And actually, I also I need to clarify that this misconception, although I use that word, so these cannot be considered as misconceptions. I think the better way of putting it is, these are very much part of the popular perception. So that's how that's ideologically driven the narrative of the history of Sri Lanka. So the kind of what we understood, what we generally understand, when you have some kind of critical approach towards the historical consciousness as misconceptions. So they're actually very much part of the way in which the general public understand the historical development of Sri Lanka. And so, but actually, so there's an important tension between these popular conception of history and the historical interpretations of critical historiography, I would say, by trained scholars. And so they also, even the trained scholars of history of Sri Lanka cannot be considered as one group. So there are diverse schools, different schools of thought, and so on. And there are different ideological orientations as well. Anyhow, my point of departure is that so there's a significant tension between popular conceptions of history and the ideas of history of Sri Lanka among academic historians. The critical, let's say, I would like to call them as the critical historiography. Right. And yes. So that when you look at first, I would like to begin with the giving an outline of what the dominant discourse of history of Sri Lanka, which is the where these so-called misconceptions coming out from. Yeah, so my argument is that the existing dominant discourse of history of Sri Lanka. So it's there's a word missing. Discourse of history of Sri Lanka emerged in the latter part of the 19th century. So that is around the period where the modern public sphere, the modern intellectuals emerged as a kind of to sort of counter the colonial project when there's a indigenous elite started. These new intellectual are very much part of this new public sphere. And one of the intellectual task of these this new public intellectuals is a production of new historical narrative, and which would satisfy the need of new indigenous elite. And so that's how this new discourse of history of Sri Lanka came into being. And also, this is also very much part of the colonial knowledge production. And this is not a narrative that was produced by these indigenous elite themselves, but many scholars have studied extensively that there was a process of colonial knowledge production, particularly since the British occupied the Kingdom of Kandy in 1815, and when they trying to administer the Kandyan Kingdom, which is a kind of which I would like to call as a kind of terra incognita, so completely strange alien territory, because as far as the coastal areas are concerned, so they knew what's going on, and the Dutch had developed a very elaborate system of administration in that area, but the Kandyan territory is a completely different cup of tea, and it's a completely different area, and so they had no clue. So initially, they completely, made a mess out of the situation, and as a result of which, so there was a massive rebellion occurred in 1818, by the Kandyan aristocracy, which helped the British to, capture the king and occupy the Kandyan land, and so they somehow British somehow managed to crush this rebellion altogether, but still the problem remained as to how this new territory, this unknown territory, is governed, administered. And so that is the context in which so they wanted to produce a new set of knowledge about this area, and so they were trying to find various texts, and the Alexander Johnston was instructed in this connection, and so that's how they managed to got a copy of Mahavamsa and got it translated firstly in some parts and later on the whole thing. And so with this development, and at the where after a few decades, and so there was a significant corpus of knowledge on history of Sri Lanka was constructed, and so you have, as a result, the two massive volumes by Emerson Tennant, titled Ceylon, and so that's knowledge also available to these new indigenous intellectuals. And so they sort of articulated this colonial knowledge with their own interests, and so that's how this new discourse of history of Sri Lanka came into being. And as I already mentioned, so that's what this is a very long story. Since our topic is something else, I don't want to go further on that line. But what I would like to emphasize is that the major ingredient of this discourse is the Mahavamsa. So that's what we have to keep in mind. And so, as I mentioned earlier, with the initiative of Alexander Johnston, the Mahavamsa was sort of invented to the this colonial project, and so it became a kind of standard text about the early history of Sri Lanka. And so there are a lot of other many other works based on the Mahavamsa detail, but what is important is that the Mahavamsa became a kind of standard text, the authentic representation of the early history of Sri Lanka. and so it became a kind of sacred text for indigenous, intellectuals as well. So that became the source of the knowledge of the early history of Sri Lanka. And as a matter of fact, when we are talking about Mahavamsa, usually we are talking about the text that was compiled in the 6th century BC. And so it was, it stopped at during the time of, and at the end of the reign of King Mahasena in 4th century AD or so. But later on, there were other sections. There was a tradition that these latter parts of the Mahavamsa came to be known as Chulavamsa. But now actually the word Chulavamsa is not very often used, and so then Mahavamsa part 1, part 2, and part 3, and so now it's still being continued, and recently, few years back, part 6 until the end of the war in 2009, was written and published by the government. And so that's but what we are basically speaking about is the first part of the Mahavamsa, which was written in 6th century BC, AD. I'm sorry, 6th century AD. Yeah. So this is usually our popular conception of history of Sri Lanka is based on the structure of the narrative of the Mahavamsa, right? So one of the major aspects, ingredient of this Mahavamsa narrative is that Mahavamsa narrated the story in which the entire island was under one monarch since the time of the Vijay, right? So you have the Vijay as the founding father of the now we call it as the founding father of the nation, the Sinhala nation. But Mahavamsa didn't say that. What Mahavamsa implies is that Vijay is the founder of the line of kings, Rajavansha. The Rajavansha that ruled the dynasty that ruled Anuradhapura at the time of Mahavamsa was written, right? So that's it's Vijay, so then I'll come back to more detail later. So my another my sort of my thesis is that this representation that you find in the Mahavamsa could be considered as a representation of the ideology of the Anuradhapura ruling elite. So it's not a just objectively written description, cannot be considered as an objective, objective description of actually, existing situation, but it's an ideologically driven representation which represent the interests of the ruling elite that ruled Anuradhapura city-states, as I would like to call it. So I will come back to that. That need to be understood. That this is a kind of this is not a kind of any text as an ideological compulsions, and so what you have to identify is what kind of ideological compulsions are behind each text. And so then the Mahavamsa could be considered as the ideological representation of the ideology of the Anuradhapura ruling elite. Or in other words, what you see in Mahavamsa is the kind of history that Anuradhapura kings would like to portray as the authentic history of that island, right? And also, and also the ruling elite included not only actually kings. Actually, I would also want to emphasize that in my view, and actually these dominant Buddhist monks based in powerful monasteries, particularly in the Mahavihara. Mahavihara was the monastery that the author of the Mahavamsa, the Mahanamathera, was also belonged to the Mahavihara monastical tradition. And so the Mahavihara bhikkhus were, so they were extremely powerful, and perhaps I would consider that they were much more powerful than politically much more powerful than kings, and so that need to be kept in mind for different reasons. So I would try to come back to it. And so let me give a brief outline of what are the popular myths or popular conception, or maybe misconception of. I would like to use the word myths rather than misconceptions that you find in that are represented in Mahavamsa. So the one is the existence of a unified polity since the time of the legendary Vijaya. So that means that it portrays the idea that entire island is under one king since the time of Vijaya, right? So that's a kind of something that has been taken for granted, right? And so that is one thing. And the other one is that the Sinhala people, and also, this is some you find directly in the Mahavamsa, and some are just ideas that have been constructed by way of reinterpreting what you find in Mahavamsa. This second point is something like that. Sinhala people as an ethnic identity group similar to the one we identify the present time. So now. So we think that, we know that, there's a group called Sinhalese who identify themselves as Sinhalese at the moment, and Sinhala ethnic group. And so then usually the general perception of the Sinhala people, or they are, intellectuals, is that this group known as Sinhalese has a history that go back to the time of Vijaya, right? And so this is linked to the, this idea is linked to the characterization of Sinhala people in Mahavamsa. The way in which Mahavamsa use this the word Sinhala is somewhat different and problematic, but so it's a complex issue, but I'm not going into detail. But it is linked to the narrative of the Mahavamsa, right? Yeah, and the most important thing is that the kings, the kings and the ruling, dynasty are identified with the Sinhala identity, right? So there are diverse views as to whether the Mahavamsa included, the people living in the whole island into the ethnic category of Sinhalese or not. There's a big debate called Gunawardena Dharmadasa debate, which occurred between the R.L.H. Gunawardena or Professor Leslie Gunawardena from Peradeniya University History Department, and K.N. Dharmadasa from Department of Sinhala. So they had a big intellectual debate on that. Yeah, so that's the idea of this Sinhala, the continuity of the continuous the history of the 2,500 years history of the Sinhala people. So that's one thing. And the other idea is the other important conception is that the role of Buddhism. The Buddhism as a dominant component of the religious life of the people since the so-called Mahindagamane. I think most of you know the event that is known as Mahindagamane. It's believed that King Asoka's son in the 3rd century BC came to Sri Lanka with the 5 others and established the founded Buddhism here. And since then, Sri Lanka became the country of Buddhism. And so it also connected with the wish of the Buddha. So Buddha himself, so the Buddha's life also linked with this Vijay story. And also it is believed that Buddha also visited the island 3 times. And first time he came and to clear up the island, expelling the yaksas who were there. But so there's an issue that even though he expelled yaksas from the island, when Vijay come, the yaksas already there again. That may be there are these 2 stories have been developed separately, and the Mahavamsa brought them together without eradicating these internal inconsistencies. That is something else that need to be discussed, but I don't have time now to discuss. But so these are these 3 components, this unified idea of unified polity, in which we identify nowadays as the Ekiya Rajya, 2500 වසරක Ekiya Rajya. So that's a popular way of understanding it since the time of Vijay. So then, the Sinhala ethnic group as the legitimate group, dominant ethnic group in Sri Lanka, and the dominancy of Buddhism. So these 3 beliefs are important. And then, so this is the popular conception. This is a popular conception. So if you counter this popular conception, if you approach this popular conception through the critical review of the historical sources, right? So then the actual political reality as could be obtained by a way of careful inquiry into the historical sources is completely different from this ideologically charged representation in the chronicle, that you find in the chronicle and other ancient texts. So that's my approach that I'm trying to do. I'm trying to confront this popular, conceptions with some facts that you gain from obtain from various historical sources through thorough thorough investigation, critical investigation of these sources, right? So then what follows is in what follows, I propose you a chronology of political history based on the critical use of various sources against the kind of narrative that you find in the dominant version of historiography of Sri Lanka. So this is the chronology that I would like to propose. I mean, these are not my own invention, but these are from already, these are based on studies by various authorities in the field. Perhaps in my view, they haven't been used to produce one kind of counter narrative. So that is something that I'm trying to do. Well, so if I give you a kind of chronological outline, so we can start from the pre-6th century BCE. BCE mean, before Common Era. This that's a kind of alternative way of using this instead of before Christ and AD, right? BCE and yeah, before Common Era. I mean, you have human settlements, right? So then you have, I mean, better to compare it with what happened in the 6th century BC. So as I mentioned earlier, the 6th century is identified as the year that Vijay arrived. And although we, whether we consider Vijay's story as a historical truth or not, so what is important is to keep in mind that it is generally understood that something important happened in the around 6th century BC. So that is the a distinct wave of migration of people from northern India, right? So generally, what is considered to be as Aryans. So they had a distinct culture and some linguistic orientation, and it's a distinct group of people. They different from the people who lived this part of the the South Asia. When I say this part of the South Asia, I'm talking about not only the island but also the South India, right? So you have to consider this as a one territory, because at that time the Sri Lanka is separated from very as narrow the Oak Strait, and also sometimes depend on the sea level, and these two land masses are linked, and we know this Adams bridge and all that, right? And so they I mean, it is not difficult to cross this water, right? And so this can be considered as a kind of one territory. Some historians, particularly this famous historian K. Indrapala, he identified this region as the SISL region. SISL means South India and Sri Lanka, right? So that's as a one sort of socio-cultural region. And so then there's a wave of migration from North India to the island. And so, I mean, there's some evidence that, there were migrations to the South Indian areas as well. Yeah, and that is a major turning point, because that represents a kind of new culture, new language, and, a lot of new things. And so there's a clearly, the clear difference between the people who were already here, right? And the people who came, which is, the wave that represented by the story that in the Mahavamsa, right? So so that's very important. So then I will come to detail, but so then let's look at the chronology. So then the next important thing is the Buddhization. The Buddhization means that the Buddhism emerged as an important cultural component, the religio-cultural component of the people. So I will show you some maps. And so then you see the emergence of multiple political centers, right? The contrary to the picture that Mahavamsa portrayed by using this Vijay story, as a, as the presence of one particular polity centered on Anuradhapura or, Upatisagam, various centers. But we see a era where there are a number of political centers. So that's important. And then the few centuries later, you see the emergence of powerful city-based states. So you see two major centers. One is Anuradhapura and the other one is Mahavamsa, right? So you see the important stage of these two, the conflict between two city-states in the story of, represented in the story of Elara Dutugamunu warfare. So that's a kind of representation of the conflict between Anuradhapura and the Mahavamsa. So these are two powerful centers. The Anuradhapura, important thing is that at the time of the compilation of Mahavamsa, this Anuradhapura state has become the dominant power center, the dominant city state. So that's why Anuradhapura is, and also when you look at Mahavamsa, the Mahavamsa also linked with Anuradhapura, and so their ruling lineages have been connected via various stories, various narrative about the line of Dutugamunu, and right, as the story goes, and there was a younger brother of Devanampitis in Anuradhapura, and he was there was some conflict, and so then he had to leave Anuradhapura, the fear of death, and so then he left with his wife, and so then the wife gave birth to a child, and he was born at a place called Yatala. Yeah, it became Yatalatissa, and the Yatalatissa's he became king, and Yatalatissa's son was a Gotabe, and Gotabe's son is Kavantissa. Kavantissa's son is Dutugamunu, right? So, I mean, by that story, the Anuradhapura line has been connected with Mahavamsa line, whereas, Dutugamunu is portrayed as the legitimate heir to the Anuradhapura line. And so then people who ruled Anuradhapura when Dutugamunu invaded Anuradhapura, whose name is Elara, is portrayed as an invader, right? So we don't know still we have no evidence about the reality of this story. So what we know this story only as a mythical representation, because when you look at the structure of the story, it has a full of mythical, the various parts from, imported from all kind of stories, not only from Sri Lanka, but, I mean, the part of stories that you find in many places, right? So that's, so then Anuradhapura became the dominant state, but, and actually the chroniclers also attached to this Mahavihara, the monastery, biggest dominant monastery, Mahavihara. And so then what they wrote was very well Anuradhapura centered. So as a result of that, as a result of this Anuradhapura centrism, we don't see the much detail about the other centers, right? And then, okay, so that's Anuradhapura centered. And so then I mean, because of this various conflict with South India, and so I mean, in 10th century AD, Anuradhapura was captured by Chola Empire. It became a colony of the Chola Empire. So then they established their center in Polonnaruwa, and so the Polonnaruwa evolved as another city-based state. And so then there was the king, another warrior from south, fought with Cholas when the Cholas' power in the South India is declining, and he managed to defeat Chola authority in Polonnaruwa, and he became, the king in the name of Vijayabahu. And so then Polonnaruwa became a flourish city-based state again. And so then you have the Parakram Bahu as the so-called greatest rule of the Polonnaruwa and so on. So then all of a sudden in the 13th century, see the collapse of Polonnaruwa and the entire civilization. Right? So then you have the completely different historical trajectory in the post 13th century period, and emergence of new kind of social formation. I'll come back to this. Then you have the distinct political development from 13th century to 16th century until the European encounter that began in 16th century. So then you have I'm not sure whether we will have time to discuss this part, but better to keep in mind that in 19th century, so there was a very with the British and with industrial revolution and all that, so there was a kind of new turning point, and so then you have the 20th century, the emergence of modern society with democracy, new economic and social development, with cultural development and education and all that. That's how the world that we know now came into being, particularly because of the 19th century and 20th century developments. So that's my alternative chronology, in contrast to the chronology of the dominant historical narrative, which is based on the Mahavamsa. Right? Let's go into detail a little bit. So this is the map of the megalithic sites, which would represent the distribution of population, human settlements before the arrival of this wave of migrations from North India, which is represented in the Mahavamsa as the Vijayagamane, and also there were other waves of migrations, and so they link with different with this storyline, and you have then Vijay asks his brother to send someone to as his heir. And so then his brother's son, the Pandu Vasudeva, came with a group, and so then there are and before that so they wanted they wanted a princess for right, the Vijay to become the coronated king, and so he wanted a princess, which was brought from Madhurapura in the Pandya Desha. And that also, the Pandya Desha, the history of Pandya Desha also somewhat important for our discussion, because some people argue that, that's the area that, also subjected to this Aryanization in that period. So anyhow, so the princess brought from Madura, the city of Madhurapura, and so with them came another group of people, which might represent another wave of migration. So there were several of such migrations which have been identified, which had been highlighted in the Mahavamsa, right? So all in all, what we can say is that there is a wave of migrations from South India, which belonging to one, let's say, one socio-cultural world. Probably people who spoke one language, right? So which you can see when you look at the inscriptions, which you find since 3rd century BC all over the country. you see a kind of, wonderful linguistic similarity in these inscriptions. And but before the arrival of these new migrants, you see these megalithic sites, right? So that means that there have been people, right? And also you see the clear signs. So I mean, they are not directly represented in the Mahavamsa story, but there are clear signs of a conflict. There are clear signs of a conflict between these let's say, pre-Vijayana people, you know, between these pre-Vijayana people and let's say let's call them pre-Aryans, right? Pre-Aryan. The Aryan is a somewhat problematical term, but for the sake of this discussion, I would use it. The pre-Aryan people and Aryan people, and then when you carefully read Mahavamsa stories, so you see a clear sign of some possible conflict between these two groups. I think, in my view, if you read this carefully, if you read the and also I mean the Buddha's first visit, the story of Buddha's first visit, I know it's a clear representation of the conflict between the newly arrived people, particularly converted into Buddhism, and there's at least one group of pre-Aryan people. Usually we have references to yaksas, so they have been given as non-humans, right? But we can easily interpret them as a kind of humans group. So there's a clear sign of possible conflict. And so then you also have reference to Nagas. The Nagas also considered to be as, they are represented as snakes, but, most probably historians call them, the group of people. And so they were portrayed as not as enemies. So those who have, connected to Buddhism, right? So the yaksas have been portrayed definitely as enemies, rivals. And not only in the story of the Buddha, not only that, the Buddha expelled, asked them to leave by frightening them through his miracles, magical acts, that performed, the Buddha chased away. That's very unlikely that the Buddha would have behaved in that way. Right? When you compare the Buddha's behaving in Tripitaka, stories. But anyhow, this is how Buddha has been depicted in the story of arrival to Sri Lanka, in the Mahavamsa. And also in the Vijay story, you see clearly the representation of this conflict between these Aryans and non-Aryan, right? So therefore, there has been there are a lot other stories. Then the fact that not only at the time of the Mahavamsa, but also later on at the time of the commentary to the Mahavamsa was written in the 10th century AD, which is known as Vansattapakasaniya, commentary to the Mahavamsa. This conflict between yaksas and these Aryans have been emphasized. So this may sounds as if when you want to emphasize something at a particular area, it shows that that conflict is already there, right? So it sounds not as a kind of something that has happened centuries earlier, but also something reflect the some aspect of the social conflict that present at the time of the the writing of these texts. So that means that we can conclude, we can come to the conclusion that that conflict between these Aryan groups and non-Aryan have not been completely resolved even at the time of the compilation of the commentary to the Mahavamsa in the 10th century AD, right? So that is one of the important aspect of the social life in the let's say the ancient, the pre-Polonnaruwa period. Yeah, and so then when you look at this map, please make note of these red dots. These red dots represent the inscriptions from belonging to the the 3rd century BC area, the before the 3rd century BC, the 300 years before the birth of Christ, right? So that means that you see the distribution, so distributed everywhere. So these inscriptions, what you find in this inscription is the inscriptions in the it's called caves, cave dwellings of Buddhist monks, right? So these are they represent the donations. These inscription usually general line is that agata anagata chatujisa sangasa dine. It is donated to the sangha Buddhist monk who came from all 4 directions, and also you have a lot of information about the donors and their relatives, and so their position and wealth of story, the information, right? The most important thing is that all of them are in one language, the early Brahmi language, right? So that can be, that means that, there is a kind of linguistic affinity, at least, the people who founded, established these cave dwellings, and the monks who were there belong to one particular linguistic group. So that is linguistic and religious group. In the first place, they were Buddhist because, they were monks. And also they wrote, they use one language. So that is a very important social and cultural fact, right? And also you see some areas without these red dots, but that doesn't say that, particularly in the north, but that's not because of there were no monks in that area, but, there were no, rock caves formations there. But when you look at these kind of places, so this is this area is presently called Kandarode, or Sinhala is called it Kandurugoda, and so these are also manifestation of the perhaps the Buddhist, some Buddhist connections in the Jaffna Peninsula. So definitely, so there was a presence of the widespread presence of Buddhism, and that area. That's what I call it Buddhization. But the problem is that to what extent this reality and also the story of Mahindagamane completely explain this process of Buddhization. We still don't know what exactly was the religious, whether this Buddhization meant the eradication of other religious, groups completely, and their religious faiths. And the Mahavamsa, tend to tell us the story that, the Buddhism, immediately after Arhat Mahinda Thero came, and when he got the, support from Devanampitissa, so gradually, within a very short time, the Buddha Sasana was established within the entire island, and its message is given. So the Mahavamsa wanted us to believe that entire country became Buddhist. So that's a simple message. But I think so there are a lot of areas that we can suspect that version, right? So there are a lot of things, and the one thing is that immediately after the you have the King Dutugamunu. Dutugamunu, after Dutugamunu's death, his brother Saddhatissa became, the king in Anuradhapura, and so then afterwards, his son Valagamba. So there were few others in between, but his younger son Valagamba, he was the most famous one, and Valagamba had a lot of political problems. So he had to face a rebellion by a Brahmana called Tiya from the south, from Ruhuna, right? So, and also,
So, excuse me, what was that name?
Tiya Brahmana.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And the important thing is that, so, and also he had an invasion from South India, right? And then, in the context of this crisis, he had to escape the Anuradhapura city. So he was, he was running away. Then when he was running away, it is famously known, in the Mahavamsa also recorded, a Jaina, a Nigantaya, called Giri, from his monastery. So he has screamed, that, the Maha Kalusinhalaya Palayana, the great dark, the black Sinhala is running away. So how do you, I mean, that means that, this Niganta, the Jaina priest called Giri, I mean, you cannot, so to make that kind of statement when the king is running away, so he must have been a powerful figure, right? So, I mean, when you take all these stories together, the conclusion that can be arrived is that, the portrait, the picture that Mahavamsa paint about the religiosity of the island is not a simple one, not as simple as that the picture painted by the Mahavamsa, right? So I mean, there are a lot of other aspects, but I don't have time. But what I want to show is that this simple process of Buddhization is not more than a kind of mythical representation, because this might be they may represent, as I mentioned earlier, the kind of ideological aspirations of the Buddhist elite in Anuradhapura, because we know that Mahavamsa was compiled by Buddhist monks belonging to the Mahavihara tradition. So they wanted to show that, I mean, they produce a story. They produce a marvelous story that the making Sri Lanka is I mean, Sri Lanka is Sri Lanka is connected with the history of Buddhism. It was a Buddha's wish that, the Sri Lanka is the place where Buddhism would last for 5,000 years, right? So that was declared by the Buddha at the, when he was, lying his death bed, right? And so it's so there is a kind of, a connection has been established between the ultimate fate of the Buddha Sasana and Sri Lanka, right? So therefore, it is understandable that all the other, the non-Buddhist elements have been, sort of, making absent, so they are disappeared from the Mahavamsa narrative. So that's it. And so this map is very important. This is completely against the popular perception of the political history of the island, right? So this map is prepared by Professor Leslie Gunawardena based on the extensive research on, the information that you find in these early inscriptions, right? Based on those information, he has identified these kind of large number of autonomous political units, right? So this is completely against the picture that Mahavamsa produced. So what Mahavamsa says is that since the time of Vijay, Sri Lanka is a one polity. But here you see how many, so about, more than a dozen,
more than 20, no, sir.
Yes. Yeah, so there are diverse. So all these are autonomous political units. So even when you read Mahavamsa between the line, not sometimes between the line, even, for example, in the Vijay story, in the Dutukamanu story, so it is said that before confronting Elara at the last battle, Dutukamunu had to defeat 32 other Tamils, and also before that, during the time of Kavantissa, the Mahavamsa mentioned about several kingdoms in the eastern area, the Soma, Seru, and places like that, right? So you see in this eastern area, so there were a number of such places, right? So the picture that you see, right, beyond the story that you have in the Mahavamsa is that the presence of large number of small political centers, which are autonomous, right? So there's no evidence that these are the one center was dominant over others, and that actually, so I think it's not difficult to believe that it was at the time of the period that is represented in the Dutukamunu Elara story that these two centers have become powerful. It was extremely comparable with the history of India at the time of Buddha, where there was a similar situation where there's something called Mahajanapada, the great centers. So there are about 16 of them have been given in Buddhist text and also Jaina text. And so then out of these Mahajanapadas, there emerged two powerful centers. That is Kosala and Magadha. So the monarchs of both are very close to the Buddha. One is this Digati Kosala, and he was his Buddha's the birthplace also under this Kosala, and other one is Magadha. The king was Bimbisara and later Ajasatta. All of them were very close associate. Buddha was very close to these two, and so they became powerful centers, and then Magadha dominated the entire this North India, and you see a kind of similar development in the island as well. So you see around 3rd century BC, this kind of the distribution of large number of political centers, probably all of them were dominated by these Aryan groups, because they use this language that was probably brought from the North India, right? And we don't know, we don't have information as to what happened to these pre-Aryan people, right? So they might have been dominated, and so they might have been marginalized, and right. So these are, when you say these kind of these cannot be considered as a powerful kingdoms. These are some, the word that have been used by Leslie Gunawardena is chieftains. So these are some, the regional chiefs, right? So that's the situation. Okay. And yeah, so then.
Nirmal, Asel is asking a question in the chat.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes, and also
What is
one
it?
thing, sir. Sir, Asela also asking one question, whether there are evidence to say that those are autonomous and what Mahavamsa says about that. At the same time, I'm also asking that, sir, in which basis this Leslie Gunawardena producing this particular map and this study?
No, the basis is very simple. I already showed you this large number of inscriptions.
Okay.
Spread all over. So that you have a lot of information in these inscriptions. Mostly, so they have been given. In most cases, these donations, these cave donations were made by individuals who identify themselves as Raja, Maharaja, Ayar, and this kind of royal titles, right? And so they are given their ancestral, connections, right? So they are, their fathers, their grandparents, and all kind of things. So then, Leslie Gunawardena had meticulously studied those information, and so they have identified that there are different dynasties, right?
Okay.
And so that's the basis on which he has compiled this information, yeah.
And sir, Asela's question is that, is there evidence to say that those are autonomous? That's the case.
Well, I don't think that there's no definite evidence, but there's no evidence to prove that one unit dominated the other, right? So when you look at when you bring all these, not only the one you have, definitely there were conflicts, because even when you look at Mahavamsa, so there's for example, when you look at the Panduka-based story, the Panduka-based story is a very important story, right? So we don't know to what extent these stories are, real, whether they are, something that what happened actually, because the G.C. Mendes, a well-known historian, doesn't believe so. He said that, he is of the opinion that Panduka-based story is a story that has been compiled to fill a gap within the storyline, bringing all parts from, the Mahabharata and all kind of stories. So I understand what he says, but at the same time, I don't completely agree with him, because I think to a certain extent, I think, some aspect of the story, although some parts have been, to compile the story, so there may be, parts came from different sources. So that's how stories are constructed. But there may be some historicity there, because it represents that, the conflict between various groups, right? So according to the Mahavamsa, the Pandukabe fought with his 10 uncles, right? And so there are extensive information about long, the warfare, right?
Yes.
So these may be probably represent the conflict between these the chieftains, right? So that's what we know. But the bottom line is that we don't know much about their life, their actual history. But we certainly know that even when you look at the broader picture, the social development, economic development, and the distribution of settlement and all that, there's no possibility of even in archaeological evidence, there's no evidence of a one central political authority at that time, right? What you see is that the emergence of the state, the bigger state with some kind of empire building capacity occurred later, right? So that may I think in my view, that happened after the Dutugamunulara warfare, right? And even, so there's, the fact that even after Dutugamunu conquered Anuradhapura, then, his nephew, right? Balagamba is his nephew, his brother's son. He had to, ran away from Anuradhapura. What does it mean? So he was not in full control of Anuradhapura, right? So there were a lot of issues, and we don't know what actually happened, and what actually, so the major aspect of these stories is that we have to understand not only what these stories say, but also what these stories hide, right? So that is the most important thing. So I cannot say that, whether they are completely autonomous and whether, there were some power relations between, but important thing is that these are not, it is not that one chief had the authority over the rest of the, chiefdoms, right? So that is what we can say
Yes.
for the moment.
And sir, one more thing, sir. I think Asel again asking one thing. So he's asking, is it enough to say that sovereignty is divided among the country and among different governors those days? So something like that.
No, well, there are no evidence to show that, there's no, there's no evidence whatsoever to show that, the entire island is a one sovereign, the political bloc, there's a one political consciousness, and so not only there are no, information, but also when you look at the socio-cultural reality, right? So there were dispersed, most probably there were dispersed settlements which are not connected to each other, right? So then you cannot say that, they form one political community. To form one sovereign bloc, you have to have one political community. So nowadays, Sri Lankans form one political community that also contested because, the Tamils are contesting and all that, right? But there's a general consensus now, right? But there's no evidence whatsoever, archaeological or textual, that, there was such a kind of one
Plurality.
what I call, so one block of, the sovereign block, right? Connected to each other, there were dispersed civilization, the settlements, right? And also some, apart from this dispersed settlements dominated by these Aryan groups, there were non-Aryans, right? Most probably all these chiefdoms were, one way or the other connected to these Aryans. Some say that, even this word Naka is Naga, is there. We don't know to what extent they represent the Naga people, which have been represented in Mahavamsa, right?
Yeah.
So we don't. Yeah.
Sir, sorry for disturbing.
Yes.
So one thing, because I heard about Ruhunu Maya Pihiti, the 3 division of the country.
That's something that came much later. So that is something that
Later.
came
Okay.
after 13th century, right?
After the 13th century.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one more
Around
question,
that
please,
time,
sir.
it's not. Under any circumstances, that division, that idea cannot be applied to this period.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Right.
Sir, one more question.
Yes.
So only one more question.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. No problem. This is for you.
Sir, you talk about the Walagamba.
Yes.
During that period, Chola or some from India attacked Sri Lanka. They thoroughly focus about Walagamba. So if the central governance was not with Walagamba, and they have another the Savanin blocks. Why didn't they attack those blocks? Only Walagamba they attacked.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I can give you several, I mean, there are a number of ways that, can answer your question. And one thing is that this time around, when it comes to the time of Balagamba, so there's much, the evolution has occurred, that is after the Dutukamunuvelara warfare. So that means that, it comparable to the situation that, the conflict between Magadha and Kosala in India. In India is much earlier, but it's structurally same, right? So therefore, at that time, Anuradhapura would have been a kind of somewhat powerful place, right? And that's one thing. Other thing is that, the story about this Chola invasion also not very convincing, right? Because usually at that time, the Cholas Cholas emerged as a powerful empire building group much later, right? At that time, there was no such thing in India called Chola Empire, right? So usually what happened is that, so this is, this identification of Chola is somewhat similar to the situation that, to the period that Mahavamsa was compiled, the 6th century, AD, that time. So usually, those days, the tradition was that, the words like Damila, Chola, Soli, these words were freely used, right? So it is very dangerous to take them literally, right? So we still don't know, apart from what, the story says, whether these invasions are Chola invasions, and, we don't know, right? So but anyhow, what Asela asked is very important, why this, Anuradhapura was centered, because, definitely Anuradhapura had become an important place, right? Interestingly, we still don't know who Elara is, right? We don't know who Elara is, right? What Mahavamsa says that, is a Chola, right?
So are there
Yes.
any information with regard to the origin of Elara? Then who
Yeah.
Elara is who's, right? Who's
Yeah,
who? Elara
no
is
information, no information. So as far as I know, so it's completely, kind of mystery. And also, that, when even in the narrative, Mahavamsa narrative, there are a lot of problems. For example, the Elara acquired Anuradhapura by killing Asela, right? Asela. Asela is the youngest brother of Devanampitis, right? So, and from Devanampitis, and also, so look, so then Elara reigned 44 years, right? Elara 44 years, right? And Devanampitis' younger brother, Asela, and Asela afterwards, Elara came, and so he reigned 44 years. So that's when Duttugamunu invaded, right? But there are only, sort of 2 generations, right? One is, Devanampitis and, his brothers, right? And then Elara, right? But what happened in Magadha? So you have Mahanaga who escaped from Anuradhapura, then his son Yatalatissa, his son Gotabaya, his son Kavantissa's son, you know, Dutugamon. So 5 generations, right? There is a kind of, you know, discrepancy between this Anuradhapura line and this Magadha line, right? So these are, you know, I mean, Mahavamsa is trying to bridge some scattered information together and compile one story. So that's what I mean. So these stories have been extensively analyzed by historians, particularly G.C. Mendis wrote his PhD on this, and he says that, you know, I mean, his opinion is that, so there is a time gap, you know. So in his view, Pandukabe's story is an invention by author of Mahavamsa to fill this gap, right? Because after all, he wanted to, you know, according to him, there is a, you know, he wanted to fill the gap between the Buddha's death and the local stories about the kings, right? And then, so what Mahavamsa, author of Mahavamsa wanted was to link Vijaya with the Buddha, no? Right? And then you have to drag the story further down, right? So then there's a gap created. So fill this gap, Pandukabe was brought in. So that's the explanation of G.C. Mendis, right? So that may be true, but, you know, I don't care too much about this story, but, you know, I mean, I'm pretty much interested in the detail, right? So the fact that, you know, how, for example, in this case, Walagamba was depicted, and, you know, who is this Tiya Brahmanaya, who is this Girinigantaya, you know, where did they came, and all kind of things, and, you know, the warfare between Pandukabe and his uncles, right? So these are memories, no? So these are most probably, these are the stories that people remembered, and, you know, what most probably, you know, done by Mahavamsa is they collected, you know. So there was a tradition of stories, right?
Nirmal, can I ask a little question?
Yes.
Also? You see, in Colombo, I showed that graph about population growth starting, let's say, 0 here, actually going behind. Because I can imagine that when people look at maps and they see these 20, 30 kingdoms and so on, in the present day, it is very difficult for us to imagine city-states.
Yeah.
Right? Because we have this conception of largeness.
Yeah.
Right? So if you look at the statistics, I don't know if we have Sri Lankan statistics of population in around this period.
Yeah.
You know, this could have been, like you said, chiefdoms. This could have been small groups of people.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So this notion of sovereignty is a present day thing in our head.
Yeah.
We can't link it to the
No.
numbers.
I mean, absolutely right. You know, I mean, you cannot, you know, you cannot link, you know, you cannot imagine, you cannot apply this modern day idea of sovereignty in whatsoever to, you know, this period. And, you know, I mean, mainly, you know, you have to understand, you have to imagine the kind of social connection, you know, connectivity of people, and, you know, and these settlements. This idea, the Janapada, is very important. The Janapada, right? And also the name, you know, for example, Gramani. The Gamini is a Gramani. Gramani is the meaning of Grama also very important. You know, these are the most important thing. Grama, in Sanskrit, Grama is a kind of colony, right? So it's I think the most important identity in my view is a kind of small community. So they, when you look at their history, and particularly when you look at the Vijay story, I have written an article on this. I mean, these are the colony of people moving from one place to another, right? So they were moving and settled down there. I don't know whether you have read Gabriel Garcia Marquez's famous novel, 100 Years of Solitude, where you have a story of, this, the moving people one place to another. And so you have, in Vijay's story, so you have Vagurata, and so then you have Singhapura, Singhabau and Singhasivali come there, and from there Vijay and his group, leave that place and come to another place and fight with the people who were there, and so then they were chased there again, and so then they come to the island and then fight with the people who were there, and these people go from one place to another, and either fight and capture their lands, or if they were defeated, then so they move to another place, and so that's a kind of reality, right? And they settle down in one particular area, right? And then there may be such diverse settlements there. So I mean, this period of these chieftains represent that kind of transformative period. And then so this is the time that sedentary agriculture start, right? So then then you have to have a surplus, so that to sustain a powerful class of chief, and also who are capable of fighting others, right? I mean, engage in warfare, you need wealth, no, right? So that's not an easy thing, right? And also to have a kind of larger political system. I mean, you need wealth. Where does this wealth come from, right? And still at this period, that also another story, that there were only small tanks, right? The larger tanks was built later on, right? And actually Mahavamsa was written at the time of the large tanks were built. The large tanks were, began to be built by the king Vasabha, right? Even at the time of Dutugamunu and Elara, large tanks had not been built. What you find in that period were the medium level tanks. When you look at the history of the tanks in Sri Lanka, the VAU, so it is a very important history. So there were three kinds of tanks. One is that small village level tanks, right? Which is called as gum VAU. This gum VAU was probably taken care of maintained by the local, communities. So you don't have a big political organization to do that, right? So it is very, well connected with this chieftain, emergence of chieftains. You have these chiefs who were, who had a small organization to take care of this, village level tanks, and they took a small surplus, and so that's kind of simple political organization, right?
The one thing, sir,
Yes.
the Tissa, I think it's made by King Devanampiya Tissa.
No, that's what the probably not only Tissa, but also the Basava Kulama Abhe, right?
Yeah,
So that's considered to be the first one made by king, and so these are probably the medium level tanks. So that's the second stage. First stage, you have the small village level tanks. So then you have the somewhat large one, medium one. So then came the massive tanks, like the Kala, and that kind of, Yoda, this large one. So they began to be constructed during the time of Vasabha. Vasabha was the first one who constructed these big tanks. So then came Mahasen, right? Then came Dhatusena, right? So these are the people who constructed. That's the time that this large city-based state emerged, right? with a, there are studies. I don't have time to explain, the evolution of Anuradhapura. So there are, this well-known Roland de Silva, the former archaeological commissioner. He has written a nice article about, the evolution of Anuradhapura city, right? It's a wonderful history. And so there is the development of Anuradhapura city-states is very well connected with the evolution of the construction of tanks, particularly the emergence of the large tanks, Mahavamsa, right? And so the earlier what you see is that, the either smaller ones. So then I think probably these chieftains, the era of this period of these chieftains represent the period where this the medium scale, the medium level tanks were began to be constructed. Is that
Yes, sir. Thank you.
That
Thank
answer
you very
you?
much for.
Yeah.
Yes, it's very clear now.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah. Thank you.
let's move a bit further, and so then I think then this is the most important one: the political crisis of Polonnaruwa, right? So when the Anuradhapura emerged as a very, very powerful political center, and also, the Leslie Gunardana has written extensively on this also, even Anuradhapura, and also, his argument is that although we call, Anuradhapura as something similar to the present day unified state, that has not been the case in his view. Well, Anuradhapura was there, it's a city, and so then there are a lot of autonomous area. There's a kind of scattered, power centers. And also, when Anuradhapura was there, also the Magama or Ruhuna emerged as a separate place, right? And also, Anuradhapura kings had no direct authority over the peripheral areas, right? But actually, there might have been a system to manage, administer the big tanks. So that was needed. So that was what, and actually, this idea of hydraulic state. So there was you have this well-known historian called Carl Wittfogel, who introduced this idea of Oriental despotism, right? Oriental despotism means that, there were these, and actually Leslie Gunardana was contested that, Wittfogelian idea of Oriental despotism. What Wittfogel argued that, there was because of the need for this central administration to take care of these networks of irrigation, tanks, they need a kind of centralized authority. So that's why you have a centralized kingdom in places like Anuradhapura, right? But then, based on, extensive research, Leslie Gunardana argued that, even this management of irrigation system or not a centralized thing. It's a very well decentralized thing. And so there was a kind of shared power because there were a lot of local power holders. And actually, the kings in general, so they, in my view, they took care of the affairs of the city, right? So that it's a walled city. So there was a city wall, right? And within that, there were completely different life, different from the life outside the cities, right? And then the king intervened in the affairs of the peripheral areas only when his authority was challenged. if there's a rebellion and there's an invasion and, otherwise, so they had their own, there's no need, when the taxes are paid properly and, there's no direct administration like we have today. So that's the nature of these kind of, this political system. And so then you have, similar thing in Polonnaruwa. And then what I want to emphasize is that when you look at this table, you see there were the Vijayabahu who actually fought Cholas and expelled them. And that is because, at that time, Chola power was declining in South India, and, so there were internal fights in between South Indian dynasties. And Vijayabahu conquered Polonnaruwa and he reigned about 55 years, right? And then, then Parakram Bahu, 33 years. And after Parakram Bahu, you see there's a crisis. So Nisanka Malla managed to, survive 9 years. Apart from that, this Kalyanamati, I think, is wives of either Nisanka Malla or Parakram Bahu. And the Leelavati, Kalyanamati was Nisanka Malla's wife, right? So anyhow, so you see this quick succession of kings, is a manifestation of a political crisis, political instability, right? And the relative political stability that, that was there during Vijayabahu's time and Parakram Bahu's time is gone now, right? And then you have this, again, this elusive figure, Kalingamaga, invaded Polonnaruwa. Again, we don't know who this, still historians are debating who this Kalingamaga, to understand who Kalingamaga was. But definitely he brought an army from Kerala. It is called a Malala Hamudava, right? And this Malala Hamudava, there's no evidence that this army went back, right? So probably they stayed here, right? This Malala, this word Malala is very, very much present in the history of Sri Lanka. And then, after this Maga's invasion, what happened was that this not only Polonnaruwa collapsed, but also this entire area, right? So you usually this, in my view, this was what happened. So this was the system, this you have, this is in a way a kind of combination of Wittfogel's idea and Lester Gunawardana's idea. So you need some kind of central administration, right? Central in the sense that, you have some kind of coordination between various power holders to take care of this complex system of irrigation, right? So that was a function of the rulers of either in Anuradhapura or Polonnaruwa. So that was that stage. And then what happened with when the Polonnaruwa was collapsed after this political crisis and the invasion of Kalingamaga, right? So the urban, these large tanks were without proper maintenance. You cannot, use these large tanks without proper maintenance. You have to not only maintain, you have to distribute water properly, right? So there are a lot of administrative works, right? And this disappearance of the Polonnaruwa kingdom and also this warfare made a massive impact on the administration of this irrigation system, right? So in my view, that's one of the major root cause behind the collapse of this entire social formation, entire civilization. So then what happened was like this. So there were scattered small tanks functioning with isolated communities, right? Which have lasted until recently as Vaugam. In the, I mean, this system began to change with the, establishment of dry zone colonization in the 1930s and 40s, right? With new settlements and then Mahavali scheme, right? So then, I mean, it is only then, this area became repopulated, right? So particularly what we call as dry zone, right? And so that you see this map is very important. This is the population map in the Anuradhapura and Polonnaru period. You see, these are the major population centers, right? And then this represents the population distribution in the present day, right? And also now, even these areas, these red dots, the population increased after 1930s. This is the 2000 census, right? These are highly depopulated area after 13th century, right? So this is completely reversal of the demographic reality of the pre-13th century period, right? In pre-13th century period, so this area is the, thinly populated, whereas these two population centers were densely populated. But here you have the complete upside down, right? This period and also this period, this area became the major, settlement, the demographic centers, right? So this was the pre-13th century period. This was the post-13th century period. So that's why I call that 13th century is a major turning point in the history of Sri Lanka. I think if you try to understand the evolution of the modern Sri Lanka, you have to start from the 13th century, because this is the demographic structure of the post-13th century. So you have two major social formations, one in the south and the central area, and one in the north, centered on Jaffna Peninsula, right? So these became, I mean, these population centers became, emerged much later. Yeah. So then, so then this map also very important, because this represent the close proximity of South India and Sri Lanka, and particularly, after the rise of Islam, you see the emergence of, the complete transformation of the Indian Ocean trade. I don't have time to go into detail, but the Indian Ocean trade play major role, particularly in Sri Lanka after 13th century, right? And this navigation, I mean, there are a lot of, the people moving from this area to, this part of the, country, right? And so this map, in my view, this is the political map of 16th century, as you find in the, the major textbooks. But I'm not very happy about the way in which these territories have been marked, right? So what you have is here, generally the Kota Kingdom, this is a kingdom of Kandy, and this is the country of mostly the Vannis, and this is the Jaffna. This is the area of, the central area of the kings of, the rulers of Jaffna. So I think Dilip told me that, Duminda, you were surprised to hear that, there was a kingdom in Jaffna, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I got to know that because I went to attend Jaffna conference in January, sir.
Yeah.
So during that visit, because there's a cultural event,
Yeah.
and they were actually showing and they were playing and performing some historical incidents, and through I think some dance item or some drama. So suddenly I asked, what is that and who is? So then that lecturer told me, the one who next to sit next to me. Then she told me that that is the King Sankilian or something like that.
Yeah.
Then I asked, who is King Sankilian or something like that, sir. So I was totally unaware about it.
Yeah. No, actually, I mean, this Jaffna, I mean, as we call it, Jaffna Kingdom was the most powerful and long-lasting, long-standing political center to be emerged after the 13th century, right? And when you look at the other kingdoms that we know these days, you know, Dambadeniya, Yapahuwa, Kurunagala, Kotte, all these, you know, lasted only very small, you know, the shorter periods, right? But when you look at the Jaffna kingdom, so it probably began during 13th century after when Maga was defeated in Polonnaruwa. So he went to Jaffna. He was there afterwards.
Yes.
I mean, there was a very complicated
Very stabilized.
series of events, but there emerged this Arya Chakravarti line, right? Maybe late 13th century, and since then it lasted until this King Sankilian
Portuguese.
was defeated by Portuguese in 1660 during that time, right?
Yes.
So that was the longest, I mean, for a short, brief period, the court taking during the time of the Parakram Bahu the sixth, this famous, I don't know whether you have heard this Sapumal Kumaraya.
Yes, and also, sir, Asela is asking who is Sapumal, then something like that.
Sapumal is his name is Sembaga Perumal.
Okay.
He was an adopted son of this Parakram Bahu the sixth. The origin of Parakram Bahu the sixth also, not, I mean, properly known, but most probably, according to the recent research, he was connected to the group called Alakeshwaras, who established the Raigama. The Raigama, what considered as Kingdom of Raigama. The Alakeshwaras, so they were originally from Kerala. So they had a Kerala origin. So they played a major role in the Indian Ocean trade. So they were traders. And interestingly, these Arya Chakravartis and Alakeshwaras were the two groups that dominated the political history in the 14th and 15th centuries, right? When Arya Chakravartis not only, had their center in Jaffna, they extended their rule even to the south. They had stationed their tax collectors in areas like Kagal. There's a inscription called Madavala Sellipiya, So they had their tax collectors then, and also they came to the south, like even to the Panadura area, and they tried to control the cinnamon growing lands in the northwest, the southwestern parts, and so they control the pearl fishing in the Bay of Mannar, and so they also want to get a grip on cinnamon growing areas as well.
And sir, in that situation, that Manavan, the Mukkuwas law, I think definitely linked with
so
that.
they were group, who had South Indian origin. So there were a lot of, groups. I don't have time to discuss this demographic history. So there were a lot of groups who had South Indian origin. So there's Mukwas, and also, there were, 3 caste groups called Karava, Salagam, and Durava, and, the Chettis and all kind of people. So there were, and also this, these Malala people, these Malala mean, Kerala. And so there were a lot of them. So they were integrated into nowadays to the Sinhala ethnic group, right? And it's a very complicated history. But, the most important thing is that these 2 powerful group of political elites, Alakeshwaras and Arya Chakravartis, right? So the Kotte, I'll show you the next one. This is the, it's from I had an exhibition on that, that's why it's there in Sinhala, I couldn't find it.
And Dilip, this is the photo that I showed you, Dilip.
Yeah. No, this actually, and this
Yes, yes.
this is how, this map is a bit wrong, because this invasion is not along the land, but along the sea, right? But anyhow, this shows the direction. So these Arya Chakravartis had this southward expansion. So they expanded until the Panadura from this side, and also Kegol area, from this side, right? And then you have Raigama here, where Alakeshwara dominated. And our Mahavamsa-based history and our dominant history says that, the Gampola was the most important kingdom at that time, right? But actually, Gampola kings were, they are not significant rulers. And actually, usually, the Alakeshwaras have not been given as the full credit as kings. So,
Sir, one thing, sir, because
Yeah.
of the possession of the tooth relic is important in that situation.
yeah,
What
so
do you
that is
think,
the, that is an explanation that you
Yeah,
provide
justification.
later, right? So, so the Mahavamsa was written during the time of Kirtisi Rajasingha, when the kingdom of Kandy has a full swing, right? So then, they, the possession of the tooth relic was the most important, symbolic, symbolic aspect of their power, right?
Yeah.
So, so that's why. But actually, when it comes to the practical world of politics, right? Alakeshwaras were much more powerful. They were the people who built Kotte, the Jayawardhanapura, right? Oh, no, I don't have it, right? So they were the people who built Kotte, right? That Kotte was built. The Kotte itself, the word itself is a Malayali word. Kottai. It's a from Kerala, Malayali language, right? So they built Kotte, and it came to be known as Sri Jayawardhanapura, that's urban center. And so they built it to fight, because they were in Raigaman, so they control Indian Ocean trade from the Beruala harbor. Beruala was a very important place. Interestingly, Beruala was the place that was visited by the well-known Chinese general Cheng He. Have you heard of Cheng He? So he was, the Cheng He's expedition is a massive thing. If it continued, it was under the leadership of, the guidance of Ming Dynasty. So the Cheng He is a general belonging to the Ming Dynasty. And so then they build a massive fleet consisting of a large number of ships. So
Sir, can I disturb? Is this the one? I remember there was a Belt and Road lecture where they said, was he the general whose ships were even bigger than Columbus's?
Yes. And actually, the Cheng He's ships so there I have pictures. I don't have time to show you. I'll show you. There's a book here. This book is very important. You know, I'll show you. There are ships. Some ships were 15 times bigger than Portuguese ships, it seems, right? And also this entire fleet of Cheng He consisted of 29,000 persons, right? So they included, you know, historians and, you know, all kind of, you know, every kind of, you know, it's I mean, the entire colony was moving on the Indian Ocean. So they traveled to Africa and Indian, you know, and also they landed, you know, to the Beirul and established an inscription there also. You have this 3 language, you know, 3 Bhasha Sellipi, you know, in 3 language, Chinese, Tamil, and, you know, whatever. And
if I can add to that, Cheng He actually came as far as the Mediterranean.
Yes.
And they were actually, the emperor in China was interested in knowing what is going beyond, because Chinese consider the Chinese civilization sort of the center and so on of the universe, right?
Yeah.
So, and then the conclusion after some expedition, he went back and said, look, there is nothing for us to get from all these crazy places.
And so he decided to stop it. You know,
he decided to stop it.
Continue. I mean, if they continue to dominate the Indian Ocean affairs, there's no way that Portuguese could intervene.
No, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the event that completely changed the entire complexion of the world history. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so then came to the Beirul, and so there was a conflict with Alakeshwaras.
And it took him to China.
Them and captured and, you know, taken to China. So there are a lot of Chinese records on that. You know, this guy, you know, he's a pediatrician, my good friend. You know, his name is Ajit Amarasinghe, who wrote this based on these Chinese records.
Yeah.
Right. And he wrote a recently very good book about, you know, the Sinha-Bahu also. He went to, you know, it's Andhra Pradesh, and, you know, he found the Sinha-Bahu. You know, he has covered a lot of, you know, he's a interested, good historical researcher.
You know, and if I can, one last thing. Actually, they wanted to take the tooth to China.
Yes.
That was one of the things they wanted to do, because like Asla was saying, that the tooth was representative of the kings of the Sinhala kings, right? So they wanted, because, you know, by then Buddhism had gone to China. So this relic was also equally important to them.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's a lot to be told about this.
No, and actually, what I want to emphasize is that, you know, the kings of Gampola is nowhere in this picture, right? It was completely the affair between Alakeshwaras and Arya Chakravartis when it comes to the local political affairs. Right?
And fought in the south. And fought out in the south.
Yes. And so then, so they came, Arya Chakravartis came down as far as, you know, this Panadur area, which is very close to their power center, Raigama. And so then they fought back and they built this court, right? And fought back. And, you know, so then came this Parakram Bahu the 6th. And so they continued the battle and captured, you know, so this Sembaga Perumal, his adopted son, so he was sent to Jaffna to conquer Arya Chakravartis, which he did, and so then he was there. So then after, you know, after Parakram Bahu died, he came back. You know, he ruled his Buonak Bahu, I don't know which number, right? And that's the situation. And so then, after the death of Parakram Bahu the 6th, when Parakram Bahu, you know, at the time, you know, there was a separate political center in Kandy also, right? but the Parakram Bahu is a warrior, and so he managed to dominate the Kandy as well. But immediately after the death of Parakram Bahu, again, this the grip of the Kotte or other centers disappeared, right? And so that's so there were small political centers everywhere. So there's one in Chilau, and there's one in Udugampola, and Udugampola is a Gampaha area, right? So there was a one called Sakalakala Vallabha, that area. There was a Thaniya Vallabha in Chilau, right? Still there's a famous temple called Suduella Devale. These kind of places. So there's a kind of, again, kind of scattered political situation. And that's the situation that you had when Portuguese arrived.
So I have one question. So this slide actually, I would like to ask, from where did you get that? Because did you get it from the school book or something like that?
Which one?
This now
This map?
the Adi Chakravarti, the Sinhala-Buddhist.
You mean this one? What?
No. On the screen one, sir.
Yeah,
Because
this
the
one.
yellow.
No. This is I mean, I'll give you a copy.
No, sir, because my issue is, sir, because I thought this is the school book. I think this is the school textbook, something like that. Because
No, this is the text written by me.
Okay. Because
this is the catalog of the exhibition that we had.
Okay,
right?
sir.
So I'll give you a copy, and I have the PDF as well.
No, sir, my point is that why you don't recognize Arya Chakrivarun as kings or just as Palaka Parampara? Why you don't want to recognize
that
them
is
as
very
kings?
simple, Dumidu. That's a very
Okay.
simple, that is the, usually according to the Mahavamsa ideology, so they give, they consider they defined a particular line of rulers which has the sovereignty over the entire island, right? So then, for example, now actually we are talking about that you have to look at it from the point of view of those who compiled the chronicle, right?
Yes.
So in this case, Mahavamsa was written in the 18th century in the Kandyan kingdom, right? So you have a king, right? So whom they considered that have the full sovereignty over he is considered to be the Chakravarti of the Emperor of Ceylon. So that's how he was addressed by the Dutch as well. High Lake Majestate, right? So even the Dutch considered that Kandyan king is the Emperor of Ceylon, right? So he was the king, right? So there cannot be other kings.
Okay.
Right? So he was the legitimate. So then you have this 19th century ideology where they consider the Sinhala-Buddhist as the dominant political group. They are the people who, the ancient civilization is considered to be a Sinhala-Buddhist thing. And also there are a lot of debates about the identity of Jaffna kingdom, right? So the Sinhala commentators do not consider it as an autonomous kingdom. They consider it sometimes part of, they were originally linked to Pandyan, ruling elite, and so then they were under Vijayanagar Empire, right? And sometimes, part of the Kandyan kingdom, so they accepted the authority of the Kandyan kingdom. And so there are different interpretations, a large number of interpretations, right? So therefore, the dominant historiography, particularly in the, I would say the Sinhala historiography, would not render the Jaffna rulers the full identity as, kings, Rajavaru, right? In the same way that they would not give this Raja title to Alakeshwaras.
Yes.
So they are known as Prabhu Raja. Prabhu Raja is the, somewhat inferior to the Raja, right? And
always keep in the less valued manners.
Yes. So that is very much part of this dominant narrative, and that's how the dominant narrative has been constructed, right?
But so in reality, they actually ruled it, right? They actually ruled the Jaffna kingdom, right? Jaffna part and everything.
Of course,
Yeah,
not.
I think
I mean,
this is a political reason,
but
I think.
what does it mean? Dumindu, you have to ask the question those days. What do you mean actually by ruling? In my view, those days ruling is collecting taxes, right? So nothing else, right? So if you are capable of, collecting taxes of one particular area, so that's a part of your territory.
My
That's
God.
it. The fact that they have stationed their tax collectors in Kegol area, what does it mean?
Yeah, definitely.
Right? That means that, they had authority over that area. That's the thing, right? So that is the, that is the situation.
And so in the current sense, it's the territorial sovereignty, right? In that sense, it's a territorial sovereignty kind of.
No, I think I think, Dumidu, we need to discuss this, lengthily later on, because this territorial sovereignty, in my view, it is a completely modern concept. It's a post-Westphalian concept that should not be applied to the situation that we are discussing here now, right? So those days, of course, there were ideologies, there were very cosmological identities, the kings, so they connected themselves to a long line of, ancient kings, right? So when you look at the inscriptions in late Anuradhapura period, so you have the at the beginning of the inscription, you have the description which read as what is it called? Katkul Kot Okavas Rajparapuran Bhat, right? That Sri Katkul mean, the Kshatriya, the group of Kshatriya. Okavas, Ikshuaku mean, this line of kings, right?
Okaka Parampara or
Yeah.
something like.
So that every king has to establish their connection with this Okaka line of kings.
Okay.
Right? So, that historical, connection was the charter of right to be the legitimate king, right? At least, even if you don't have the proper link, you have to make people believe that you have connection, right? So you have to construct a myth that, you are part of it.
Yes.
Right? So that's the source of the sovereignty, not any other territorial, thing. So this may, this ability to establish the sovereignty may be, added by, the possession of, the tooth relics and, all kind of things, right? So there were various ritualistic aspects. So there are various objects and, based on the religious beliefs and all that, right? And so then ultimately it has to be defined in terms of whether you are a legitimate king or not, right? Within a particular ideological, discourse, right? So if you are the legitimate king, so you are, you have a rightful, authority to rule that area. But then you have the actual, you have to have the actual power. I would like to emphasize the ritual power versus the actual power. You may have a ritual power. Ritual power means that, ideology, that also accepted by the people, right? But there may be a more powerful group or one person who had the actual power to collect your tax. So then there's no point in claiming that, you are not my king, and so and so is my legitimate king, and I'm not in a position to pay you tax. Because at the end of the day, what matters is the actual power. Who had the military power? So those are the real source of power, right? And so that is that is different from the kind of idea we of sovereignty nowadays, no, right? So the Gampola and the Kagala is a very much part of the very close to the close to the center of Gampola kings, right? But he had no actual power, although he had the ritual power, the ritual qualification, right? He didn't have the actual power to prevent Jaffna Arya Chakravartis from stationing the tax collectors in his in their doorstep. So that's the bottom line.
Yes, sir. Got you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. And also this is this Portuguese activities, and I would like to clear some misconception about the Portuguese involvement. The general misperception is that Portuguese rule in Sri Lanka started in 1505, which is completely wrong, right? So what happened in not even in 1905, but 1906, they first visit and came, and so then only 1917 Portuguese, first port was constructed, and then so you have in 1921 this so-called Vijayaba Kollaya, right? Which gave the opportunity for the Portuguese to intervene into the affairs of Kotte Kingdom when the Buonakabahu, the king of Kotte, wanted Portuguese support to fight his younger brother, Mayadunne, who had established in Sitawaka after Vijayaba Kollaya. And then, since then, Portuguese gradually became very much part of Kotte politics, right? And then 1551, the Buonakabahu was assassinated. He was killed by a gunshot of a Portuguese soldier, because still is being debated whether it's an intentional or mistake. Anyhow, so then his grandson Don Juan Dharmapal was baptized, and his image was taken to Portugal, and kept as a vassal of Portuguese king. Anyhow, but although he was the king of Kotte at that time and the emperor of Ceylon, as Europeans perceived it, the Dharmapala didn't have actual power, because at that time Mayadunne has been able to acquire most of the areas that was under the Kotte kingdom, right, with the support of his warrior king Sitawaka Rajasinghe, right? So Sitawaka Rajasinghe continued the military confrontation with Portuguese after his father's death, right? And then you have the rise of Sitawaka at the expense of Kotte kingdom, until Sitawaka Rajasingha's death in 1593. After Sitawaka Rajasingha was died, entire area became, so he captured Kandyan kingdom as well, the Sitawaka Rajasingha. And then you had, so that's when this Kusumasana Devi affair took place and all that, right? And then when Dharmapala died in 1597, so then legally Kotte became the possession of Portuguese monarch, and actually effectively the possession of the Philip II, the King of Spain, because at that time Portuguese crown was under Philip II, the King of Spain, and so they had the sovereign authority over the Kotte kingdom, right? So it was in 1597 that Sri Lanka, actually part of Sri Lanka, became a Portuguese colony, and then so then you have this Dutch Kandy connection in 1938, and so then you have the war between 1638 to 1658. So then that period then we discuss. So these are I hope may provide you some information to rethink about the popular some conception of history of Sri Lanka. Shall I stop here?
I have one little question to
okay.
think about. Fascinating. I would like to get this slide. What has I mean? We can have a long talk, but in this story that has been mentioned, we hear about the Aryans. I know that you mentioned this term Aryan is problematic already, right?
Yeah.
But nowhere do we come across this word, the Dravidian, because if you look at Kerala, Madurai, Tamil Nadu, and so on, right? South India, you can say, is Dravidian, right? So in this, there seems this Dravidian. It seems as if the term Dravidian is kept out of the narrative.
Yeah.
Is that correct, or is it something that we need to look into more critically? Because it has a very strong political implication, right?
No, actually,
I'm
not an expert on that topic, to be honest, Dilip, but usually Dravidian is considered to be a linguistic category rather than kind of. Dravidian, the language group. You have Tamil, you have Kannada, you have
Kannada, Tamil,
and you have
Malayalam.
There's one linguistic family, and
actually,
so I think how I understand this in terms of this. When it comes to Sri Lanka, it's very easy to explain. So you have this group of people who came from, let's say, North India, right, with a particular linguistic, tradition and all, this is so-called Aryan. So then you encounter a group of people. So they may be, there may be diverse, but, this dichotomy was created, right? So likewise, usually, this Aryanization thing. So there was a group of people who came from this, Iran area, and so they came here. They confronted the people who were already in India. So there was a kind of dichotomy. And so the South India, you know, the land beyond this Vindhya range is considered to be the land of different kind of people.
Yeah.
That different from this so-called, you know, I mean, the Vedic people, you know, the people who compile this Vedic Veda literature, right? And what you have in, you know, I mean,
So
Mahabharata.
you're bringing in Sanskrit into it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I mean, the group of people you find in epics like the
Mahabharata.
and Ramayana. Usually the Ramayana is important in our story. Usually
Yes.
the Ramayana is considered to be as the story, as a
Yes.
representation of the expansion of Aryan domination to the southern part of India. So these demons, the Yakshas and Rakshas, were the, you know, the Rakshasas. I mean, you have these Rakshasas in, you know, the Ravana. So you have Rama and Lakshmana who settle down in this forest, and so
Forest, yeah.
so then you have Rakshasas, and so the Rakshasas is considered to be the dehumanization of these the humans that these Aryan confronted, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's, in my view, that's exactly what happened in you know, in the Mahavamsa, right? So these Aryans came, and so you find, you know, you confronted a group of people, so they are being dehumanized, right? So they were not considered as humans, right? So they can take the human form, but they were not human. So then when you are not human, when they are not human, you can easily kill them, right? So I think, you know, in those days, when you want to, you know, destroy a group, so then you have to, even now, you know, when you fight an enemy, you call them Koti, right? So it's like, right? So Yaksha, the Naga, and so these are, you know, these are kind of easy way to confront the other. And so likewise, you know, that's how I identify this Aryan Dravidian dichotomy. Then
Okay.
these terminologies came later.
Later. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Nirmal. So I think Nasim. Okay. Anyone is having any questions or for Nirmal or?
Yeah, no, mine is just a comment. I think it is because the way we learn history uh, shows us lots of the kingdom, but it shows us that they were one after the other. So it's like, then it somewhere,
Yeah.
came. So we don't, yeah. So it's like it was always a central kingdom, but it will just move to different places because of certain historical and other events. So it is
It's
probably
a very linear, it's a very linear narrative.
I
and,
think
you
there's
know,
a lot of
yeah.
and maybe there's no misrepresent. I mean, there is no lying as such, but it's the representation is in our minds this very linear. I think that's what it is.
Yeah. No, that's that's a, you know, I mean, that's the issue, you know, that you have, you know, the even so that you have this idea of drift to the southwest. I don't know, you are familiar with the term. In Sinhala, it's
Yes.
called Nirita Digata Sankramana Vima. That's what you learn in schools.
Yeah, that
right?
was there. We learned that Nirita Diga
Yeah.
Sankramana. That
So,
we learned.
so you have the decline of Polonnaruwa. So then Sinhala Nirita Dikata Sankramane Una, drift to the southwest. And it's like, all the king came and, then first established themselves in Dambadeniya and then Yapahua, then Kurunagala, then Gampola and Kotte. It's like, it's a kind of, a train is moving from one station to another, right?
Yeah.
So that's not, that has not been the case, right? And so for example, the after, wait. After the, the collapse of, after the Magas invasion, so there emerged several centers. There's one, there are three important things. You have Dambadeniya, you have, so then you have Yapahu, and also you have another place called Govindamale in Monaragal area, right? So, I mean, all these three places, the rocks, right? So they're on top of, they are small, the palaces is built on top of these the rocks, right? And so that's a kind of that shows the kind of political arrangement at that time. So that is the security. When you climb up on the top, you see, you get a real sense if you visit Dambadeniya. When you climb the top of the rock, you see the surrounding areas. I mean, enemies are coming from the far away areas. You can see them. It is not, you have time to prepare yourself, right? And then, so I think, so you cannot have a day-to-day administration of people in the surrounding area when you are in, when you are living in that kind of, the palace on top of a rock, right? So because there's no direct connection with the people, and so you are there. So you have the temple of Truth relic there, and everything is there, right? So so that's a kind of, it's like what happened in Europe after the fall of Roman Empire, right? So I mean, in during the Roman Empire, you have big cities, right? So then after the so-called, the what is called the invasion from, northern people, the barbarians, and so then you have this emergence of small castles everywhere. So in Europe, they have, I mean, so you have a similar situation, in Sri Lanka. So that's a kind of, that's not a kind of linear thing, but it's a kind of new phenomenon, like what happened in 3rd century BC, when these small chieftains emerged in different places, in different sizes.
Oh, so Australia had said this thing that you can't, sovereignty cannot be discussed on limiting tax collection. I suppose those who collected the taxes also had a corresponding duty to safeguard that region from invaders. That must have been the deal, right?
Yes, that's true. That's
So
true.
you give
but,
security and you take taxes.
yeah, no, well, it's like this, no. So then, why you have to ask, I mean, why does a person pay taxes to, another person, right? So of course, when you are forced by, the with this by a party who has, authority to, dominate over your life, having armed power and all that, you are forced to pay taxes, right? but then you would not do, it's not a voluntary thing, right?
Yes.
So that, so then these rulers also, so they may do it, once or twice, but to continue it, you need the consent. So that is what is called in political philosophy called hegemony, right? You need the consent. And then, so there has to be a reciprocity. Okay, I would pay tax, but what you give me, in return is a protection. So that is the kind of, that's the arrangement in feudal Europe as well, right? And then, yes, but actually, when you have the military power, the people can rely on them because, after all, rulers have the interest in protecting the people who pay them taxes, right? So the reciprocity is there anyway, because unless you can't protect the people who pay you taxes, so you cannot collect them, no, right? So then, therefore, definitely, you have to protect the people who pay you taxes. So if the political authority lasts long, a permanent relationship has to be established. So that's what exactly happened in feudal Europe, right? So there was a kind of lord-vassal relationship from the top up to the bottom, and it lasted centuries. But in Sri Lanka, you cannot see that, that kind of, you cannot see that kind of gradual evolution of the feudal type of relationship, because, there were a lot of events, there were invasion. And so then when there was a conflict between Arya Chakravartis and southern rulers. And so then all of a sudden Europeans came. The entire complexion completely changed, right? Unlike in Europe, actually you have the evolution of the feudal system beginning from since fall of the Roman Empire. It lasted till 12th, 13th centuries, and when then transformation started to happen.
Thank you, sir. That was a fantastic explanation. Yes. Are there any other questions? Anyone else has any other comments? I am very interested now, sir. You gave us a lecture about the ancient tax collection system and the structure of rule. That was at the arts faculty, and now this.
Yeah, what Dutch, the changes that Dutch made. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So now I'm interested in, now that is of course not related to the project, but I'm interested now in the little bridge of history that I don't know what happened actually between that original. Yeah. So you talked about, the concept of the tithe and the 10% and how that the, very conceptually, the laws of Manu and everything. And this, you spoke about the Dutch period. Now I'm a little concerned to bridge that part of history that I still don't know. That is this, the pre-13th century stuff.
Yeah.
There must be some.
No, yeah.
I want to know whether it was the same
the
kind of thing.
Pre-13th century system is unique in the sense that, so you have this distribution of water factor. So that is very important.
Right.
The difference between so when you have these two, for example, this is the area, you can see the arrow is moving, right?
Yes.
so this is the area that was, emerged as a major centers of human settlements in after 13th century. No, I have the other map. Let me change the. So that's.
That was fascinating, that line, Candy, as a subordinate of Corte.
No, yeah, it was, madam.
Yeah.
Yes, because
We never
when I was
thought, no?
reading those no, when I was reading those K.W. Gunamardana and those books, I found that also, because then later it became powerful with the Dutch relations and after the.
So the so you can see the this slideshow, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is very important. This is the area. This is what we call as wet zone. No,
Yes.
this is what we call dry zone, right? So the major difference in terms of this this is the agroecological map, right? So the main thing is that the staple diet is rice, no? So the paddy cultivation is the major economic activity, right? For which proper water
Irrigation is needed. Yes.
water supply is needed, right? So that's fundamental, right? So and here what you have in the dry zone, you don't have the rainfall equally distributed throughout the year, and so you have to collect water, and so that's a logic behind this emergence of this irrigated reservoirs, tanks, right? So you collect, accumulate water there, you kept there, and so they distribute there. You need a kind of administration, and particularly when you have large, massive tanks, right? So they have to be managed, maintained, and properly taken care of. For which you need a proper administration, a kind of central administration, right? So that is the basis of this Wittfogel's idea, and what is Lester Gunardana's counter argument against Wittfogel. Anyhow, both parties agree that there's a kind of administrative system, right? So that is very much part of the political function of the state, the taking care of the, whether it is the decentralized as Lester Gunardhan argued or centralized as Wittfogel argued. So you have to have a administrative system. So that is the raison d'etre of the state. That is why, if you ask why there's a state, that is why it is called a hydraulic state.
Right.
Right. So then, what would happen in this area, right? In this area, so you have the equal distribution of rainfall throughout the year, right? So you don't have irrigation works to engage in paddy cultivation, right? And then when it from the point of view of the cultivators, so you don't have the intervention of an outsider to regulate your water supply.
You don't need it.
Yeah. So only thing you need is to pray to the God to give,
The weather pattern should be
water,
normal. Yes.
right? So then you don't need the king. God is enough, right? And then, so therefore, the major connecting thread between the king and the ordinary person is missing in this wet zone, right? So that is that is the reason why political authority is not a very permanent thing in the social, organization of the wet zone.
Right.
So
Okay. And
there's
now
so that's why, even, ordinary people can, live even without a king, right? If there's no
they can
security
sustain
issue,
themselves. Yes.
if there's no security issue, that's not. But here, since for centuries, this highly complex irrigation system has been evolved, so you cannot survive. You cannot, engage in your economic activity, the basic economic activities, that is paddy cultivation, without the support of a central administration of the water supply. Right. So therefore, the political organization in the two regions are completely different from each other. From the point of view of the ordinary people, the centralized political, administration was compulsory for their day-to-day activities for the people, ordinary people, to engage in their daily economic activity, that is paddy cultivation. But that's not the case in this part of the country. That's a major difference. So the only requirement is the security, right? If there's a security threat, you need someone to, who take care of you.
I suppose this also makes sense in the context that that's probably why candy needs a symbol like the tooth.
Yeah. Yes. You need lot of
supporting evidence,
extra economic, there's extra economic reasons to legitimize the royal authority, right? So
you need a lot of symbolic things.
You don't need a lot of that kind of symbolic things, but you need an actual presence of a king, so that he take care of the distribution of water. That is fundamental. But in this wet zone, the people can live without a king, but usually you have the ideological world, religious world, and the presence of a king is a kind of gives some you a confidence, and right, it's a also psychological thing.
All right. I think, my goodness, you very generously gave us 3 hours of your time. That's amazing. Thank you so much. And I hope you got the recording as well. I think whoever's recording can stop now, so because I want to conclude. If you don't have any other questions, then I'm going to thank Professor Nirmal on behalf of the project for doing this lecture with us. And I think it's very important, not only for Dumindu, of course, very important for Dumindu, because this